Aloha. This is Lono again. I'm a Kahuna priest, as many of you know by now. Today's I want to talk about America. Two Americas. One that I love, and the second that I absolutely despise. America is more than just a country. It was founded on certain values, which at the time and even till today are the most enlightened values that it's possible for a country to be founded upon, for the most part. And that is the idea that it's a democracy. And a democracy means that every human being is considered to be the source of the rights which we get from God. We all come here from the same place. We all come here from God. You know, the people who are the sons and daughters of billionaires don't have any more claim to this world than the sons and daughters of the poorest person living in sub-Saharan Africa, or in many of the very poor countries of the world where people literally have to dig through trash to even eat. Every one of these people, every person, is a part of God and is deserving of the respect and love that is due a fellow divine being. There just cannot be any debate about that. That's the ultimate isness of everything. And when we come here from God, we come here with something that the Native Americans call sacred space, and what we in America call rights. We get our rights from God, not from a government. And every time we forget that principle, that very basic foundational principle to human relationships, every time throughout history we forget that, we wind up getting taught how important that is, because we lose our rights to tyrants. And America stands in the same place today. There are a group of billionaires out there. These billionaires own the government through the banks, through large corporations that are international corporations, international organizations that are political, things like the World Economic Forum, the International Monetary Fund. All of these organizations are who really run the world. And I get so surprised by how many liberal people and Republican conservative people who don't get that. They think that the appropriate thing is to take sides. So you have liberals trying to side with the Democrats, who at this stage of the game are interested in feathering the nests of these billionaires that fund them. I can remember a day when I was a much younger man. I'm 75 now. But when I was a much younger man, the Democratic Party was thought of as the party of the blue-collar worker. Boy, has that changed. The Democratic Party is now the party of the billionaires, the big bankers, the George Soroses of the world, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Hillary Clinton. All of these people have these incredibly profitable and gigantic foundations with billions of dollars that they use to control the world. And all of these folks out there that are uneducated, and I say that for a reason we'll get into more in a moment, but they buy into the propaganda. And that's because these people own the educational institutions. They own all of the Ivy League colleges, the Harvard universities. Harvard, to me, is one of the most corrupt institutions in the world. It's because of Harvard that we have the food pyramid. It's because of Harvard that the sugar industry paid off 3 of their scientists to publish fraudulent research papers blaming cholesterol and heart disease on saturated fat instead of sugar. And so now we have, 50 years later, a population full of very ill people, all of whom eat processed foods that are high in carbs, high in sugar, and they're dying. According to the CDC, over 50% of the people in this country have a chronic disease or are on their way to one. And a lot of this, it used to be that the only people, 20 years ago, the only people who had fatty liver disease were alcoholics. Today, an alcoholic is in the minority of people who have fatty liver disease, which is a serious problem. So these billionaires, they control the food industry. They control the banking industry. They control government. They control the Democratic Party, and they do. They control the Republican Party, and they do. And most importantly, they control the news media. So most of the so-called news that we get is actually propaganda. It has nothing to do with reality. It only has to do with what these billionaires want us to understand so that they can get their tyranny more unfolded. They want more and more power. They want power now over the entire world. And they're working very aggressively to get it through places like the International Monetary Fund and the World Economic Forum. Klaus Schwab, George Soros, Bill and Melinda Gates, or I should say Bill Gates now. I guess he's divorced. I don't know what Melinda's attitudes are. But the world is full of these billionaires that are just absolutely sure that they know better for you than what you know for yourself. And that's the path to tyranny. We've gone through it so many times. So let's talk a minute about democracy. While that's an enlightened concept, it becomes very difficult for any government to remain democratically based. And the reason is that in order to have a functioning democracy, you have to have people who are educated. You know, our founding fathers talked about this, and that's why we became a democratic republic. Because they said that the average person is so busy making a living, trying to till their fields, take care of their livestock, do what it takes just to survive, that they don't have the ability to become aware of the implications of certain kinds of ideas. And these ideas can sound great, but they're not great. The idea of having a whole bunch of production, for instance, shipped overseas, where child labor working in sweatshops will make something for 10 or 25 cents an hour that allows us to get the product here in the United States cheap, that doesn't really work in the long run. It may work for me to get my iPhone a little cheaper. It may work for me to get my whatever it is I need to buy in the world cheaper. But ultimately, it comes home to roost. And it comes home to roost as a really big problem for the country. But the average person doesn't understand that. The average person doesn't understand why the government can't just give everybody a $10,000 check, or this idea of reparations, where now we're going to somehow give black people, tens of thousands of dollars in reparations for slavery. I get it, and that may sound good if you're a black person, but it doesn't work. And what will happen is the whole country will go bankrupt. And I think the black people that were arguing for reparations are going to find out that they've lost more than they gained, should that ever come to pass. Because you can't just keep creating money out of thin air, and that's what we're doing. What are we now? Over $30 trillion in debt in this country. And it doesn't really matter whether it's Republican or Democrat. The Republicans like to blame the Democrats, but who votes for these? That's the game they started to play. And that is that they will get into this budget process. There's supposed to be individual budgeting bills that get approved through the course of the year. Well, that's not what's happening. What's happening is they keep putting it off and putting it off until all of a sudden there's some kind of crisis, and then all of a sudden they want to pass this omnibus bill that includes all of these things together. Well, the reason they do that is so that the politicians can get pork built into their spending bills. Bill by bill, it becomes obvious what they're trying to do. But when all of a sudden you have a several thousand-page document that nobody's had the chance to read, we wind up with funding about whether or not men can breastfeed. It's ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. So the key to democracy is the education of the common man. And one of the reasons you can know that we're on our way to tyranny is because our educational system has been eroded to the point where it's basically useless. My daughter is a school teacher in middle school and has been teaching now for almost 20 years. And she can tell you how poor the educational system is. Part of it's due to the teachers, part of it's due mostly to the school administrators who are answering to higher-ups in the political change. And of course the big culprit is the parents who've checked out. They don't care what their kids are doing. If their kids don't get good grades, if their kids fail a test, if there's a parent-teachers conference, they don't even bother to show up. So is it any wonder why we have a whole bunch of kids out there who don't know how to read or write or do basic math? Many years ago, I worked for E.F. Hutton. I was one of the people who helped George Ball found the financial planning industry. He started a company called E.F. Hutton Financial Services based on work that I did to write a series of college courses on financial planning. And that's a fact. And he set me up he wanted me to go to New York, to be in New York, but I told him there was not enough money in the world that you could pay me to be in New York. Here's why. This is where I live. I don't live in cities. And so he said, well, where would you want to live if you could live anywhere? And I want to use your program. We want to be able to train people to do financial planning. This is before financial planning was ever a standalone business, or there was such a thing as a certified financial planner. This is 10 years before all of that. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I wouldn't mind living in Grand Junction. Grand Junction, Colorado's got a good airport, and it was right where Colony Oil Shale was building out a whole city on the side of a mountain to be able to deal with oil shale, and the economy was booming. And besides that, it was an area that had good elk hunting, good fishing, good pheasant hunting, and really good area for growing a garden. Fruit trees. Palisade peaches are famous around the United States for how good they are. And that's where I said I'd like to live. So he moved me to Grand Junction, paid for the move. We rented an office over there and set up the first office for E.F. Hutton Financial Services in the country at Grand Junction, Colorado. So I found myself needing to hire some people. Now remember, we're dealing with finances. And I couldn't find people who were college graduates that had the ability to do 5th grade math. How do you multiply 350 shares times 22 and 5/8? And they couldn't do it. How can you be a stockbroker? How can you be a financial planner if you can't do 5th grade math? And we're talking about, let's see, I'm 75 now. I was in my 30s back then. So we're talking 40 years ago. And the school system has deteriorated significantly since then. There are these programs that come out periodically on YouTube where somebody will go interview the man on the street. And they'll ask what the difference is, or, what are the difference, how is the government divided up? And they don't know the difference between the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. They don't know what the Declaration of Independence is. They don't know any of these things. They can tell you about their little latest game on their Apple iPhone, but they don't know the difference between a congressman and a senator. They have no idea the principles upon which this country was founded. So is it any surprise that the media can put out all kinds of disinformation and these people will just soak it up and buy it? Now that doesn't make them wrong or bad. And in reality, I think the thing that we need to understand is that the vast majority of people will do the right thing once they are aware of what that right thing is. Doesn't matter whether they're Democrats or Republicans. But when you have a media and an educational system that keep people deliberately dumbed down, then they become easy to push around with fear. And that's what's happening today. It's just everything is about fear. We got to do this or that's going to happen. We got to do this or that's going to happen. Oh my gosh, Russia invaded Ukraine. So what we need to do is spend billions of dollars reinforcing Ukraine's border while our border is completely open, and millions of illegal aliens that we have no idea who these people are flooding into our country, and they're destroying it. They will destroy it. Why will they destroy it? It's not because they're evil. There are certain among them that are. I mean, I'm sure that there are all kinds of Islamic fundamentalists, Chinese, communists, people who don't agree with our value system, that are a large part of the people, or at least a significant part of the people, making their way illegally into this country with the intention of doing us harm. But most of these people are good people. They want to have a better life for their family and for their kids, and I get that. But that doesn't mean that we should just have an open border and people should just be able to pour across. I know when my grandparents came to this country, their first stop was Ellis Island. And they had to show that they were not diseased, that they had the ability to speak some basic English. So that by the time they got it, and they had to have some assets with them, so that by the time they came into this country, there was a way they could be set up and become a productive part of the country. That's not happening right now. And that's on purpose. Because the powers that be, the billionaires that are controlling all of this, want to bring down the United States. And they understand that flooding tens of millions of people into the population who can't even speak the language, who can't be productive in many ways, are going to become a burden on the system. And it's going to provoke a lot of antagonism between citizens who see these illegals being treated better than they are. So we have an America that is based on values that made us wealthy. And these values are that every human being is a part of God. It is the people that are the source of the rights. And then you have an America that's composed of the culture of corruption. That's the part I despise.